And we're live. You're listening to the Hashgraph Enthusiast Show.
Hosted by Brandon Davenport, aka It's Brandon D.
Another week in Hedera, Hashgraph, HBAR. Love it. Right now, I think Karate Combat is still live with probably 1 million people tuned in. Last I saw, it was over 1 million. Just crazy. It's real-time adoption of crypto happening before our eyes on Hedera. So, I mean, it's pretty wild. It's pretty wild stuff. We got a lot to talk about today. You're tuning into episode 141 of Hashgraph Enthusiasts, talking about everything in Hedera, top stories. We have Richard Bair coming on the show in about half an hour to chat about Project Hiero. Hiera. We'll figure out what's going on. There goes my Hiero. Foo Fighters reference also. But he's coming on the show. He's going to tell us what it's all about because it's a huge thing. I think it's a massive thing in this ecosystem. Hedera moving the whole code base to the Linux Foundation and changing how the development and growth of the network is going to happen over the coming years. It's huge. I think this is one of the biggest developments, but there's a lot to unpack. So I'm happy to have Richard Bair coming by the show, VP of Engineering at Swords Labs, aka Hashgraph, and one of the leaders in the initiative. So it'll be a good start. Also, too, shout out, thank you to the community. I hit 6,000 followers on X, which was awesome. I've been in the ecosystem for years, and it's just so great to see the appreciation and everything like that. So shout out to everybody. Appreciate you. Monkey, what's going on? LFG. Genfinity, good to see you. Hola. Should be a good show today. Yeah, Hashgraph Enthusiasts is live every Wednesday at 12 p.m. Eastern, 9 a.m. Pacific on YouTube, X, and LinkedIn. Well, LinkedIn, I got to still update my profile. Good God. No, man, what's going on? Good to see you. Zildjian, GM, Wonderbar, what's going on? Cool PFP. Let's just dive into it. We got some ecosystem updates to go through before Richard Bair stops by. So, I mean, off the hop, this is really the news of the day here. Karate Combat live, I think it just ended. Okay, so 1.2 million. I don't know if we can see that there. 1.2 million viewers of Karate Combat 49 in Singapore. Pretty incredible. Lots of stuff has been happening. If people have been on X at all, you've probably seen Karate Combat going on. My pleasant surprise, if people recall, a month ago or so, I posted a video where I was like freaking out on my front step of my house, like Hedera marketing is not good and Karate Combat's happening and they're not part of it. And I'm going on and on about it. I think it definitely ruffled some feathers, but there's so much to talk about with Karate Combat. One of the key things is that Hedera's in it this time around. They're tweeting the intern at Hedera with the account is posting away here during Karate Combat. So this is great to see. Retweeting. They've got a new ad that they ran during Karate Combat, which is much better. It's not the old Christian Hasker PowerPoint presentation. It's actually like Karate Combat talking about the application. That's what people care about. You know, that's really what it's all about. So great to see a new ad. And they're tweeting, they're retweeting, they're in it. They retweeted me, and all sorts of good stuff. Also too, if you can see right here, there's something happening, and I wanted to just play a clip of what's happening here, because this is another great example of some good stuff happening in the ecosystem. Let me just pull up this clip here, because this is really great. This is featuring Devin from Swirlds Labs, and this is live on Karate Combat, again, in front of hundreds of thousands of people, spreading the good word of Hedera. So let's check out this clip.
But we're going to touch on that in just a minute. Let's go ahead and join President Awesome, who is pitside, with an important announcement.
Hey guys, so listen up. There's some major changes that have happened to Karate Combat, and Karate Combat is evolving at a very quick rate. Right now, you just saw what happens when these elbows come into play. We had the closest voting we've ever had, and it showed how important the token was. It showed how powerful the fans are when they have tokens. Okay, look, I proposed this rule for the elbow change. I feel it'll evolve the sport.
Yeah, they're talking about the recent vote that happened with Karate
Even
Token.
myself, I started getting worried, and it showed how powerful the fans
That's
are.
Devin, by
And
the way,
control
from
is with
Swirlds
the
Labs,
fans. So
or
I'm here with my
Hedera.
man. Karate Combat is built on Hedera. He'll talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, just like you said, Karate Combat built on Hedera, a decentralized Web3 open source technology. I think the big thing is that Hedera brings speed, it brings performance, sustainability, it's low cost, and that really just helps all the fans that are using the KC app ensure that they get that fun, performance, sort of digital experience when they're doing things like enabling elbow striking in the pit. It's so cool to see what's being built on Hedera. You guys are doing great.
We're doing it for you guys. The fans have control. Name another sports league where the fan has control.
Right. So you got to dig it. I mean, that's really good to see, like actually people from Hedera on the stream talking about all sorts of good stuff, which is great. No, I don't believe Devin works for the HBAR Foundation. He works for Swirlds Labs, now Hashgraph. I had sushi with him in Denver. He's a great guy. Also, some other crazy, well, maybe what was the other thing too? Hedera posted some other stuff. Anyways, Karate Combat, we got a lot to talk about, but Karate Combat clearly, I think that it's truly like mainstream crypto adoption happening on Hedera. It can't be stressed enough. And I think that it's great to see Hedera really starting to dive into this big time, because it's needed, it's necessary, it's super important. And also, we've got a booth at Karate Combat, right? Hello Future. We've got Stater, all sorts of other projects here, Saucer Swap. We're seeing representatives from Hedera at Karate Combat. So last time when I was complaining versus this time around, night and day as far as I'm concerned. I think it's really, really, really great to see. So Karate Combat, big stuff. I'm digging it. Also, too, the Hello Future Hackathon that I've been talking about on the show, the winners for that are going to be announced tomorrow. So keep an eye out for that. It was pushed back, but the winners are going to be announced tomorrow. And according to them, there was about 80, 90 submissions, all sorts of good stuff, as we saw, Nomad from Milan, Pluto from HashPack's gaming thing, the Hgraph revenue dashboard, all sorts of different things. So that's going to be something to keep an eye out on. So yeah, keep a lookout for that 100%. Also, this was really interesting to see. Hashpoint Research, new project in the ecosystem, with a post that I think really caught the community by storm. This concerns the Hedera staking rewards account 0.0.800. For the first time in history over the past 4 days, it's a surplus, which means that there's more HBAR going in than coming out. Now, I know that staking rewards are very, very, very low. I think it's like 0.2%, but we've bottomed out. And Hashpoint Research, I think, is there's some stuff brewing over there. I've been seeing things all over X. So there's a trend in this ecosystem of more data and analytics becoming available for the ecosystem, which I think is like so crucial and so important. So that's really, really interesting to see. Also, an update from Bonzo Finance. Their mainnet launch is continuing on the path, but still kind of dealing with some delays. This was an update that they shared on the 12th, so obviously quite a few days ago, but just worth quickly mentioning from the Bonzo Finance standpoint. Borrowing and lending, I've talked about it on the show, how big of an impact it's going to have on our ecosystem. And right now, it seems with Bonzo Finance is Supra is just waiting on a grant from the HBAR Foundation. And Bonzo Finance is also waiting on a grant for some rewards, incentive, standard stuff that needs to happen in DeFi. Part of the foundation's focus on enabling these kinds of use cases. And then Bonzo Finance kind of waiting to do some testing with the Super Oracle. So we've been keeping up with this evolving story on the show. This was just a recent update. So I would stay tuned to Bonzo Finance's socials for official news, but that's where Bonzo Finance is at right now. So looking forward to that going on mainnet. We need borrowing and lending. Also, too, Neuron, this is an update. There's a bit of a trend that we're seeing here. Both Neuron and TuneFM have raised money for their projects, a substantial amount of money. Neuron announced a $3.5 million seed round. And this was pretty exciting to see. This is outside investment coming into the Hedera ecosystem through these projects, which I think is really, really interesting and really, really important development to see. As many in the ecosystem mention, it's really important at this time for outside money to come in. So these kinds of headlines, I think that's really, 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 really great to see. So huge shout out to Neuron. On that as well, TuneFM, I mentioned, they've raised, this is CoinDesk with this article, they've raised $50 million. And again, TuneFM, we've talked about it on the show extensively. They're part of the Hashgraph NFT working group and a contributor to the HIP 920, music metadata standards, all that kind of stuff. I also had a chat with Andrew in Denver earlier this year. So working on great stuff. Music is near and dear to my heart. And, this article, TuneFM has raised $50 million from Global Emerging Markets Group 8 months after they had raised $20 million funding round. So $70 million TuneFM has raised. And it's these kinds of stories that really get me excited. We also saw that last week, MTech had an investment from Accenture. So it's these kinds of things that, again, get me really excited about what's going on in this ecosystem on the backdrop of all the different changes and developments that we've seen. So I kind of dig it. Let me see here. What comments do we got going on? Oh yeah. When Brandon D, 1 million views. I don't know. Let's see if we can get the views up. If the more the merrier. If you're watching the show, feel free to share, send the link, share in the chat. The more the merrier tuning into the show. There was a request for a question here too from No Man. Can you drill down on how the Hiero move will or won't affect governing council governance? Yeah, of course. I'm going to ask Richard that when he joins the show just in about 20 minutes here. Let's also take a look at some of the events right now that are happening that Hedera is a part of. Hedera AI conference. This was last week, basically just after the show last week, so missed out on this. But Hedera was at the AI conference 2024 with Equity Lab. So lots of good stuff going on. I mean, it's great to see Hedera really branching out into other kinds of verticals and ecosystems beyond just Web3. So that's really, really, really cool to see. Also, speaking of right now, Hedera is currently at token 2049. We're seeing lots of updates, especially from patches at Hashgraph about what's going on there. This is also the conference where Hiero was announced. And also this is where Karate Combat's happening. So Token 2049 is probably one of the largest crypto conferences and gatherings in the world in Singapore this year. And there's some serious moves being made. This was a real world asset and payments side event. Arcax, obviously, doing work with Hedera recently. They minted BlackRock money market funds on Hedera and also funds from Aberdeen. So this was a panel featuring Arcax and kind of touching on some of the different Hedera things with IO Builders and Red Swan that's also tokenizing real estate on Hedera. And also another panel that took place at Token 29 featuring Charles Hoskinson from Cardano and also Sabrina from the HBAR Foundation, plus other speakers. This is really great to see too. This is a pretty stacked panel. And it's great to see in the context of, real world assets, Hedera really being a part of the conversation. And also we're going to touch on the show is the launch of the Asset Tokenization Studio from Hedera, which is huge and kind of ties right into this, what's happening with Token 2049 and also the narrative surrounding real world assets. I think that whole aspect of crypto has kind of taken over the narrative in a lot of ways. So it seems that Hedera is definitely taking some strong moves to capitalize on that. On that, the Australian digital dollar project is launching on the Hedera network in partnership with the HBAR Foundation. So a lot of people that are familiar with the Hedera Stablecoin Studio that was announced last year, which I feel is similar to the Asset Tokenization Studio, we haven't really heard a lot about, what products are being launched on the Hedera Stablecoin Studio. Rob Allen recently, from the Governing Council on Australian Payments Plus, made it clear that this Australian digital dollar was one of the first products that would be leveraging the Hedera Stablecoin Studio. So that's really exciting. So obviously, the Australian digital dollar is going to be a major on and off ramp into Web3 for everybody, obviously in Australia. And I think sets a bit of a template and a bit of a tone for what we can expect to see with other stablecoin products that might be minted on Hedera. And Rob Allen, in response to a question from Bonzo Finance, says, and clarifies, it's non-custodial, right? Buy AUDD, hold it in your HTS-enabled wallet, obviously referring to something like HashPack or Blade. Use it in all the dApps that support it. So let's say, for example, on Saucer Swap, there could be a liquidity pool that holds, Grelf and the Australian digital dollar. Similar to you'd have a pool that holds Grelf and USDC, right? So really, really interesting stuff. And it just feeds into that conversation of the need for liquidity for these stablecoins, especially USDC. So this is a very interesting one to keep an eye on. Again, it's just kind of the initial announcement. But I think that this is going to be big. And CoinMan, the H Barbarian, comments here. Significant adoption of AUDD is expected both within Australia, globally, particularly in industries such as international remittance, escrow services, and real-time payment settlements. So I think that's really what it's all about here. So I'm pretty stoked about this stuff. And to be honest, it's a relief to, see the Stablecoin Studio being used for something like this. I think that's really great. Pluto from HashPack shares a bit of a teaser in regards to an automated test setup with the new unlimited token association toggle. So these are automated tests happening with HashPack. And currently what they're doing is they're testing the unlimited token auto association. So basically on Hedera, we have something called token association, which means that someone has to associate a token before they can receive it, which is great for security, for not getting spam in your wallet, and also required by enterprises, right? An enterprise can't open a wallet and then just have a bunch of junk sent to it. So it's a necessary feature. But for people bridging over from other networks where it's not really the norm, it's a learning curve. It can actually be an obstacle. And so this kind of feature, essentially what it provides is the ability for a wallet to say, hey, I want to receive everything, and then be able to function without needing that kind of manual token association process. So lots of people working on this in HashPack, definitely, making headwinds with this. And it's very cool to see this, behind the scenes look at these different tests and everything like that. So, and also too, Pluto's just been, posting, again, CTO of HashPack, posting a lot of different like alpha and teasers and all sorts of different things. So I definitely go check out his profile and see what's going on. Someone else's profile, just quickly flipping back to the Token 2049 stuff. Patches from Swirlds Labs, Hashgraph. He's posting on X all over the place right now. Obviously at Karate Combat. There's him with some folks from Hedera. There's Oliver. I've had Oliver on the show. He's the social media guy for Hedera. So he's making some of the moves on the Hedera socials. So it's great to see that happening. Stuff's going down, right? And Patches is definitely part of the kind of real world asset tokenization efforts at Hedera and, AKA Hashgraph or Swirlds Labs. So that's really great to see. It's awesome to see team members, employees, leaders really participating in these events, and even stuff like, Karate Combat and everything like that. It's not really related to, enterprise DLT adoption or whatever, but it's happening, right? We've been wondering, when are we going to see mass adoption? It's happening. So it's great to see that energy from Hedera now really being focused on that in a much more, I think, kind of increased way. Now, the big story of the day, or I'd say of the week, or potentially of the year, to be honest, Hiero. We're going to have Richard Bair from Hashgraph, aka Swirlds Labs, stopping by in about 10 minutes here to talk about it with us and kind of help us understand how it changes the Hedera ecosystem, why it was brought about. But what I want to do is just quickly start off with this clip of Leemon. Now, this all went down at the Linux Foundation Open Source Summit. And the Linux Foundation is obviously massive. They manage all sorts of open source software. And essentially the broad stroke of this is Hedera has contributed all of the code for Hedera. As we know, Hedera was already open sourced, so it's not involving that at all. It's just moving it from just an open source project to taking that open source code and moving it to a foundation designed to kind of custody that and enable that further development. And, that in itself can be definitely confusing to people. It's like, what does that mean for Hedera? What's going on? What is Hiero? What's going on with HBAR? Like, I think from a developer standpoint, it's pretty par for the course for a lot of things, but because this is Web3 and because this is Hedera, it's a little different. It's really a first, I think, in this industry. But let's watch this clip of Leemon talking about this, and then we'll go over a couple deets before having Richard Bair on. So, if you're watching, give a minute to share the show, it should be a good conversation. But here's Leemon.
Here today. So we have the Linux Foundation, and within that there's LFDT, Linux Foundation Distributed Trust, Decentralized Trust, and then within that there is Hiero. The Hiero project, there we are. Hello future, hello Hiero future. The Hiero project is the contribution from Hedera of all of the code. So this is the first time that a public blockchain DLT has taken all of its code, its open source code, and put it in an independent organization. So of course we have representatives on it. Hedera has joined LFDT, but it's independent. We don't control it. You can get involved. You can become a contributor and then a maintainer, and then you can become part of the leadership and you can help run it. This is independent. This is a big deal. We are the first public blockchain or DLT to do this. I don't think we're the last. I think everyone should be doing this. And so we are very happy to have this new Hiero project. And everything has been contributed. So it is the code for the mainnet validator nodes. It's the code for the mirror nodes that watch it and remember it. It's the code for the explorers that allow you to go back and see the whole history and do queries on it. It's the code for SDKs that help you to build on top of it. It's the code for all sorts of other tools.
Right? So that's really what this is about, is Hedera enabling, from a development standpoint, the actual growth of the network and removing, I think, a lot of barriers, right? I think that the development process for Hedera, the network, has been relatively closed, even though it's open source. The only ways to really affect the network are through the HIP process, but it's not so easy for somebody to just go and start adding stuff to the network. And we need that kind of layer of separation from the Hedera mainnet and the code base of what is this thing. And now this thing has become Hiero, and Hedera and the governing council use Hiero to, run the Hedera mainnet. And because we create that level of separation, I think it becomes easier and easier for people to build on Hedera, and it becomes easier for a lot of these different pieces of tooling and products to make it into the actual network itself, in a way that hopefully will be much more decentralized, right? Like Richard Bair, who's stopping by in a minute here, is on the technical steering committee for Hiero. And what I'll do is I'll just quickly pull up the Hiero website. So check this out. So this is the official announcement blog, published by Charles Atkins, right, the president of Hedera. So the Hiero project, but this is the website for it. And obviously these different things talking about the features and benefits of Hiero, these are obviously the same things that we've seen for Hedera. And you kind of have to recontextualize it in your brain, right? Okay, Hedera is using Hiero, so obviously these same things apply. But more interestingly, you've got this technical steering committee, right? There's Richard Bair, Dr. Leemon, Baird, some folks from Lime Chain, some folks from other organizations. But the idea here is that this technical steering committee, the management and maintenance and development of Hiero, will be much more distributed and decentralized, and will be kind of outside of Hedera, right? Hedera, the public network, will use Hiero. So again, it's a little bit to kind of chew on, but I think that this is definitely going to be one of the biggest moments for this network for sure. And they've got a roadmap here. We're going to talk about this with Richard as well, for sure. But this is definitely a big step. Now, just to really clarify, it's not like this is another network. This is, again, just the code base rebranded in a way and migrated to the Linux Foundation's Decentralized Trust. That's basically what this is. And the other interesting thing here is these logos, right? So I shared this, but these are the folks involved with the Decentralized Trust. And this is the announcement from the Linux Foundation's Decentralized Trust. And the membership involved, right? We've got Accenture, we've got DTCC, Hedera, and Hitachi. Already 4 names that we talk about extensively in this ecosystem, whether it's governing council members, possible use cases, or, in Accenture's case, a company that's investing in multiple different Hedera products. And then you've got other names attached to this Linux Foundation's Decentralized Trust initiative, right? We've got folks like Bank of America, Casper, Chainlink, Citibank. We've got Hashgraph, of course, the AKA Swirls Labs, IO Builders, Oracle. Interestingly enough, Richard Bair was previously at Oracle. Fun little factoid. R3, Polygon, all that different kind of stuff, validation cloud. So we've got a few different Hedera projects, but then we also have, again, as really the cornerstone of this, we've got the key members and of course Hedera, and this really being kind of, as Leemon was saying, kind of a groundbreaking thing, with Hedera being the first kind of DLT to do something like this. But I've got Richard Bair coming in now, and I'm really looking forward to chatting with him on this, because I think he's really going to help us, really get a good idea what's going on with this. So Richard Bair is a VP of software engineering at Swirlds Labs, aka Hashgraph now, which is great, and previously held positions at Oracle and Sun Microsystems, obviously before getting acquired by Oracle. And he first started at Hedera back in 2021, and over the years, Richard has seen some pretty important products and changes in our ecosystem, and most recently, like we were just talking about, he's become an initial member of the Hiero Technical Steering Committee and helped lead the initiative. So welcome to the show, Richard. It's so great to have you, and I hope you're doing well. Let me know if I left anything out of your intro.
Yeah, you're good. Thanks, Brandon. I'm glad to be here. I guess my audio and everything's working. Hopefully it's all good.
We're all good. Sounds great.
I was going to have that same cup. I forgot it in the kitchen because I was like, Brandon is always drinking from something. Yeah. And so I was like, I was going to bring my cup. But I'm glad to be here. I think, I have in my Twitter handle, right, there's something a little bit about me and then like deeply uncomfortable with tweeting. Yeah. I think developer presentations, I'm very happy with those. Those are really good. But having an actual sort of online media presence, not something that we have, the engineers on our team are typically very outgoing on. But I would love to change that. And so any other future opportunities have to come on would be great.
Yeah, open door always. And I think that's definitely been a big topic for people in the ecosystem, and a big conversation in the community around marketing and changes needed at Hedera. And to be honest with you, it was very refreshing to see someone that, isn't a marketing person, but is the person actually building and managing these initiatives out front on social media, like answering questions in real time. And I think that the results of that is like less confusion, more people getting behind this. So I think that in the past, I think that a big announcement or a launch like this might not have been so impactful, but because of that tweak, you guys should definitely be doing more of that. And I think that this was like fantastic.
Yeah, it definitely feels good. Yeah. It's nice to be involved. And I think that's actually one of the main reasons for Hiero really is to deepen that engagement at the technical level. I mean, I'll admit, I've got a little Ethereum envy. I watch how their development teams are building things, and they have their all-core devs call, for example, that anybody can watch, anybody can see what's coming. They have their meetings where they decide what goes into the next releases. All that kind of stuff is done in a very open, collaborative way. And we really wanted to have a similar sort of a vibe going on inside Hedera Hashgraph. Hedera Hashgraph inside our network. So. That was one of the motivators for Hiero was like, we need proper open source governance that will allow anybody anywhere to participate. You don't have to be an employee at Hashgraph. You don't have to be an employee with LimeChain. You don't have to be but anybody anywhere should be able to participate. And it's all just based on pure open source principles, proper meritocracy. You have good code changes, then come on in, including, as Leemon mentioned at the launch announcement in Vienna, all the way up to leadership in the Hiero open source project.
100%. I love that. And so maybe we can kind of pull back a bit for folks maybe unfamiliar with some of the different layers to this, and maybe could you just give a brief overview of like the Linux Foundation's Decentralized Trust? What's the purpose of it? What is Hedera's relationship to it? It seems like there's so many like important brands and organizations involved. So maybe you can just kind of paint that picture for us.
Yeah, you bet. So, of course, open source goes back a long time. And initially, it was all just about making the source open and picking a good license.
Right.
These days, that's trivial. Everybody can do it. You just pick an Apache 2 license or an MIT license. Everybody loves you and they'll use your project. And we've done that. So we use the Apache 2 license for all of our code. It's all open source. Life is good. But that's really not enough. That's just like the starting point. That just allows people to see into the code and see what's going on. But, if we were bad people, what we could do is we could take all of our open source code and make it closed source and do additional development on it. Yes, whatever version of the open source code that you have available, you could use, you could build on, you could do what you wanted with. But, we own the Hashgraph organization on GitHub. We could just make it private and nobody would have access to the code anymore.
Right.
That would be kind of lame. The nice thing about these open source foundations like Linux Foundation is that they own that code. They own that repo. And their whole reason for existence is to provide a vendor neutral home for code development. So if we were to look at the Linux Foundation, its purpose is to be a vendor neutral home. They don't tell us how to build our code. They don't tell us, they really, I don't know. Yeah, they don't tell us how to build our code. They don't give us the technical direction. They don't give us business direction. They don't give us any of that. But what they do is they provide a vendor neutral home. And if we, for example, became evil and started to exert vendor specific control over that organization, over that, over Hiero, then Linux Foundation is a trusted person that everybody can look to and say, hey, Linux Foundation, look at these guys at Hiero. They're all behaving really badly. Linux Foundation can come in and say, okay, you guys are all off.
Right.
But it's not something that they've ever done or ever would do in the real world. It's one of those things where when you create the proper incentives, everybody behaves correctly. And that's why we go into an open foundation like this. It gives trust. People have trust. And if you looked at the big companies like Oracle, you mentioned, I was at Sun Microsystems and I was at Oracle for a long time. At Oracle, they have an open source program office. If you are somewhere, one of those 50,000 engineers somewhere inside Oracle, and you say, oh, this is a great project, I would like to contribute to it. Or this is a great project, I would like to use it to help build my product. You've got to go get approval for that from some central program office.
Right.
Now, if you go to that central program office and you say, hey, I would like to use this open source project, they say, well, who's running it? Now, I don't know, it's just some random company out here called, Hedera Hashgraph. Then, they have a whole process that they have to go through in order to do that. And most engineers try to avoid that level of work, right? It's like, I'll just
more paperwork,
or I'll just do something else. By being part of a trusted organization like the Linux Foundation, these other big, entities, they already have accepted Linux Foundation. They're already members of the Linux Foundation. In order to contribute code and everything, the bar is way lower. And so we wanted to be in a place where there would be, number one, instant recognition by everybody that we really are open source. Because as you know, we open sourced this stuff completely a couple years ago, but there's still a lot of people who would say, oh, Hedera is not open source, it's proprietary.
Right.
And so we wanted to sort of put the nail in the coffin on that one and say, we are part of the Linux Foundation. You can't say that we're not open source now.
Yeah, yeah.
And we also wanted to make it really easy for anybody to be able to contribute to it. And we also wanted to increase the level of trust that people have that the open source project is going to be run in a proper open source way.
Gotcha.
Now, within the Linux Foundation, they have a ton of different projects. There's the CNCF, Cloud Native Compute Foundation, which is where Kubernetes lives. If anybody knows Kubernetes, that whole ecosystem is massive, and it's in there. Of course, Linux itself, Linux kernel, is part of the Linux Foundation. Even the, I think it's OpenJS is the name of it, which is actually the foundation that manages Node.js, is also part of the Linux Foundation. So that there's a lot of actually really critical code that everybody is using and relies on that's done by the Linux Foundation. Inside the Linux Foundation, they had Hyperledger. And Hyperledger was kind of like there was Hyperledger Besu, which we use for our EVM implementation. But there was also Hyperledger Fabric, which was, and Hyperledger was just like an overarching brand name for all these things, even though they really didn't have a whole lot in common with each other. Hyperledger Fabric was like an Ethereum client that you could use for private Ethereum networks. And they decided to rebrand themselves as the Decentralized Trust, Linux Foundation Decentralized Trust, and broaden out the sort of projects that could be part of that. So we joined the LFDT, Linux Foundation Decentralized Trust, and as one of the founding members, meaning that at the moment that they did the announcement, we were there.
Right.
And also, Hedera has joined the governing board of the Linux Foundation Decentralized Trust.
Okay.
So inside the Linux Foundation, you can join it and pay dues. And if you pay those dues, a portion of that money goes to this governing board, and they get to spend it on things like marketing, events, and stuff like that. So then underneath the Linux Foundation Decentralized Trust, we have the Hiero project, which is everything Hedera. And then underneath that, we have a whole bunch of sub-projects like the consensus node, docs, HIP repo, one of my favorite PBJ, mirror node, all these kinds of things will be projects underneath Hiero. So
Gotcha.
That's how it's organized.
That's great. So basically, what you're saying is the relationship that Hedera has to the Linux Foundation's Decentralized Trust is really about moving the source code of Hedera to something that is more like decentrally managed, that isn't so gate kept. So as you said, if Hedera turned evil, the network and the code base wouldn't be as affected. And also too, what you're saying is, because these boxes have been checked from a corporate or organizational standpoint, a lot of the magic that's going to happen to get this enterprise adoption is going to start with someone with a really cool idea in the CTO's office at some company that wants to tinker with something and move something to production. And right now there can be a lot of checks and balances and paperwork and red tape to make that happen, which is just really discouraging. And they're like, well, I'll just pick up something else. But now this moves Hedera in the form of Hiero into a position where that individual that's going to have the breakthrough idea at some organization can start tinkering now with this much more easily. Yeah, exactly. So I'll give you an example from my own life. At Oracle, one of the roles that I had was as an architect on our IoT platforms that we had at Oracle, or they have. And one of them was a supply chain management tool. And supply chain management is one of the core businesses that Oracle's in. And we wanted to build it on a blockchain. And so, of course, we chose Hyperledger Fabric. Was it fast? No. Was it cheap? No. I mean, I'm not trying to throw shade on those. Yeah. I'm just saying that there were challenges. As a Hedera guy, it'd be awesome if I'd be able to say, yeah, we can use Hedera. But getting approval for that sort of thing is really difficult, especially at the time when not all the code had been open sourced. It was like, yeah, that was never going to happen. Right. But now, and being part of the LFDT sort of opens up those sorts of doors that weren't available before. That's okay. That's really cool to hear. And definitely, it gets me excited for, again, like I think a lot of that magic is going to happen with those individuals at these organizations. That's great. And then, so we've got a good idea of kind of what Hiero is and Hedera's kind of position in this new kind of entity. And now we start to talk about the past, the future, what this means. And I think a really great place to start is from a community question that I think it was funny. You responded to and was like, I'm just going to talk about this on Brandon's show. But the community question was, what influence does the Hedera Governing Council hold over this Hiero project? Would the goals and incentives of Hedera and Hiero ever be misaligned? And kind of like, how does this change or not change the Hedera Governing Council? Yeah, I think this is a really fundamental question. And it's one that we spent a long time on before making this move. So to provide a little bit of context, this idea of going to a foundation is something that we've discussed at the board level, the GC level, for a long time. And one of the things that was very central to the decision-making process was, what is the relationship between Hedera and Hiero? Of course, we didn't have a name for it at the time, but what's the relationship between these things? Concern was, are we handing over control of the Hedera network to, whoever happens to be writing the source code? Right. Do we trust them? Where's the trust model? How does this whole thing work?
So I think the way that I think about this is that Hiero is where we develop the source code. Today, it's the Hashgraph team and the people that we work with develop that source code.
Mm-hmm.
If you were to look at the maintainers on the consensus node software, for example, it's like all these people from Hashgraph, formerly Swirlds Labs, formerly Hedera. Those are the ones who are there, right? And so if you were to look at the relationship between the two things, you'd say Hiero is the place where the source code is developed. Hedera is a deployment of that source code.
Okay.
And Hedera needs to maintain control over what source code is actually deployed to their network. And
gotcha. There's a level of separation to that in a way.
Yeah. And so like Hedera has a seat on the technical steering committee. The technical steering committee is made up of 9 individuals, with no more than 2 of them from any one company.
Okay.
There's a whole legal language that defines exactly what that means, and Leemon is an exception. So Leemon sort of represents himself. He has a permanent seat on the TSC. Hedera has a seat on the TSC for the first 3 years. And then after that, their seat goes into being a normal one that gets elected. Then there are maintainer seats. Basically, the maintainers of the different projects inside Hiero can elect people to sit on the technical steering committee. Then there is a seat for any contributor. So even if you're not a maintainer or a committer, but you have contributed source code, documentation, or something like that to the projects, you'll be eligible to vote for the contributor seat. You elect somebody to sit as a contributor. And there's also an end user seat, which is for anybody who's, I'd say like the Karate Combats and the Atmos and those sorts of people in the world. Anybody who's using this product to build their businesses, they would be eligible to vote for a member that sits on the TSC. And then there's a couple seats that are filled by all the other people vote and elect a couple more people to fill it out. So that's like this whole decentralized rule set for who can sit on the technical steering committee. And critically, no more than 2 from any one company. Leemon representing himself and not Hashgraph. And that means that we're going to have a whole bunch of people there. It's not going to be the same faces that we've always seen. And I personally am hoping that there's going to be a lot, I have certain people that I hope end up getting elected to these positions.
Nice.
But, that are totally outside of, the normal set. I'm really bullish on that. I think that it would be phenomenal for this ecosystem to get some more of the builders and voices involved here, and at a very high level in terms of what we're doing. So Hedera has some representation on the TSC, but they don't control it. They don't have any controlling interest on it. It's the TSC members who get to decide, what code we're going to build. The HIP process is going to move. Yeah, it has moved. Now, I mean, we haven't actually moved the repo over, but the HIP process is owned by the TSC. So if you have a new HIP, you'd come to the TSC to get it approved. The TSC will review the HIPs and vote on it. And again, there's only a handful of us from Hashgraph, a couple from LimeChain, one from Hedera, Leemon, and then a bunch of other people who have yet to be elected to fill those seats. So it should be very representative of the people who are actually building on Hedera or building Hedera that'll be representing that. Now, so we have some HIP. It comes through. We all vote for it. It's great. Hedera looks at the HIP. The governing council looks at it, and they say technical committee, TechCom, as we call it specifically, looks at the HIP and says, "Oh, that's a wonderful HIP. We love it." Then they can accept the HIP. Now, on the open source side, on Hiero, if I got my Hiero on, Hiero can go implement the HIPs that were approved by the technical steering committee, whether or not Hedera approves them.
Gotcha.
But Hedera will never deploy that code to mainnet if they don't approve of it. And we, as an open source community, are interested in supporting Hedera. So, there's going to be a partnership here. We're going to be saying, okay, you guys don't like that HIP. That's very important information. What can we do to make it acceptable? But we may find that there are some HIPs that will never be acceptable to them, but are necessary in the community. I'll give you an example. If we were doing like these, somebody wanted to take the Hiero source code and they wanted to build a network and run it behind a firewall for their bank. And let's say that they wanted to have some kind of service added to it that was, I don't know, proprietary for their system. And they said, hey, but we could implement this in a way that's open source, and anybody who's doing something like us could reuse this code. And Hedera says, no, we don't want that on mainnet. Not a problem. We have spent, we shipped our modularized services code in June, I think, right? So we spent a good deal of time modularizing the code base. Consequently, we can actually take the Hiero source code and make a build of it for this, theoretical private usage. And we could do a build of it for Hedera. And Hedera still gets to deploy the code that they approve of. And we have, other builds that people can use for other purposes. That's all fine. So we're going to find ways, is it possible for there to be conflict between Hiero and Hedera? Yes. Is it likely? No. In the cases where there are differences, like for example, a voting service. Let's say that the community says, yes, we want to add a voting service to this source code base.
Yeah.
And we're like, Hedera's like, no, we don't really want to do that on mainnet. Great. We can still implement it on the open source side. And then Hedera could just say, yeah, I'm not going to take that module. And they deploy without the module.
Right.
That's fine. Those sorts of coordinations, I think, is what's going to happen. I have a really hard time seeing a future where Hiero and Hedera are truly at odds. I just don't really think that's going to happen. But any sort of misalignment of interest, we'll just work together in order to make sure that what is built and produced and deployed to mainnet is according to Hedera specifications. They control what code is deployed to mainnet. Hiero controls what code is developed, and the two of them together work together to make sure that the code that's developed can be deployed to mainnet.
Gotcha. So the hope here is kind of like for that best of both worlds scenario where, we want to be able to have these kind of unlimited possibilities for what this network can be, but still give Hedera the final decision on what makes it to mainnet. So this network can grow outside of potentially what Hedera wants it to be. And for enterprise usage or whatever it might be to deploy all these different networks. But then Hedera still has the ability to say, well, this is what we want our network. This is how we want our network to function. These are the pieces we're going to use. And there's a high likelihood you're saying that in the years to come, Hiero and then the code base that's used for the Hedera mainnet may look very different, and that's okay.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's unlikely to be very different, but okay. It could be. And if it were, it's kind of like a Linux distribution in a way. There's a single Linux kernel. They produce a Linux kernel, but then you have all these different Linux distributions that are built off of the same kernel, right? A lot of the same open source code goes into all of them and different distributions. That's fine. I think that's good. Somebody else was asking like, well, are we giving away the value of our HBARs or whatever, can anybody run a network? It's like, look, a network exists because of the network effect. It's just setting up a few nodes and saying, look, I have a new network doesn't really mean a lot.
Yeah.
There's a ton of effort that goes into, as you know, right? Getting the USDC or whoever else to deploy your network.
Yeah.
All the integrations, the bridges, saucer swap, getting a DEX on there, or the wallets. There's this huge ecosystem around it. The likelihood of somebody being able to take Hiero, which they could have done anyway. All this code was open source anyway. Every one of these blockchains is open source anyway. You can do the same thing with Ethereum. You can do the same thing with any other network. Just go take the code and set up your own network. Good luck with that. That's going to be really hard to do.
Right.
So I don't think I see this as like an unqualified improvement of the situation that we're in. There's no new risks that we're taking on. There's it just makes it more inclusive, more vendor neutral for control of the source code itself.
Gotcha. Okay, so what you're saying is when people raise the question of, intellectual property and forking the network and this and that, and considerations for like potential competitors and other Hedera copies spinning up, what you're saying more so is that doesn't really have anything to do so much with having the code or being able to stand up a network. It's more to do with that network effect. Like, how do you get a governing council? How do you get a large group of validators? How do you get these DEXs? How do you get this liquidity on the network? Those are the real barriers and arguably kind of protections, competitive protections. And I think that there's another dynamic I'm kind of feeling here at play that I think is very healthy for Hedera. I think that this also places some additional very healthy pressure on Hedera to continue to kind of stay on the top of this Hiero mountain, you know? And I think that that is a very healthy thing, that it can be looked at as an incentive to say, okay, it's out here. Everything's out in the open. And I think that that definitely is an incentive for Hedera to really double down and deliver as a network, leveraging Hiero.
Yeah, and I think that, you know, they are very conscientious about wanting Hedera. I mean, what's interesting about our situation, right, is like when I first joined Hedera, like all the different aspects were in one house. We had the development in one place, we had the business development in one place, we had the, you know, marketing in one place, the governing council, you know, Mance and Leemon, you know, Mance was the CEO and everything else, all in one place. And then as those pieces have been, you know, factored out, it requires, there's like the good and the bad of that, right? It's like monarchy versus democracy. You go down democracy's road and there's a lot more coordination and competing interests and things like that you got to deal with. Monarchy is really nice and effective. You can get things done.
Sure.
But, you know, it's one of those things that's actually really frustrating to me personally, is all the times on Twitter when people on other networks, you know, not bad mouthing anybody, but they badmouth us by saying that, oh, we're not a decentralized. And I can tell you that decentralization is a very serious thing for everybody at Hedera, at Hashgraph. You know, these moves that we make, you can see that we're putting our control where our mouth is. Right. You know, and Hedera did that as well. The governing council is responsible for governing the operation of the public network.
Right.
But the code was broken out, and officially with Hiero broken out into the Linux Foundation for control. And business development was broken out, HBAR Foundation, Hashgraph Association, you know. So it's like, yeah, there's a whole group of people, and you know, it is a democracy. It really is. There's a lot of, you know, everybody's making their independent decisions to try to make this successful, and the governing council is very, very much, you know, interested in the success of the network. And I think that they, you know, demonstrated their willingness to put their control where their mouth is. It's like, yeah, not only are we interested in decentralization, but we're going to move the code to this independent organization as well. And I think they should be commended for that.
Yeah, 100%. Like it's definitely, you know, from, as you've said, maybe from a purely business standpoint, this isn't something that necessarily benefits Hedera, but from a network standpoint, from a community standpoint, from a future standpoint, this is really the definition of like making those short-term sacrifices for long-term sustainability. So yeah, and that's why I kind of was telling people before you jumped on is like, I do feel this is really going to be, when we look back, this is going to be one of those turning points that is a component of this Hedera 2.0 that Mance and others are kind of speaking to. You know, the further decentralization of this, and not only just expanding Hedera, the tentacles of Hedera's ecosystem, but going into these other ecosystems, creating this kind of graph, this fabric between everything that just, as you were saying, allows things to move more freely and remove some of those barriers. Now, one thing you touched on that was really interesting to me, and maybe something that might be helpful for some people, is looking back a little bit in the journey getting to Hiero. You mentioned the modularization of the code base, which I imagine was like a massive effort.
It was massive.
Yeah, it was massive. And so I just wanted to kind of touch on that. Like, can you take us a little bit through that journey of getting to Hiero? What were some of the like challenges, any kind of big moments in the kind of journey to Hiero?
Yeah, I think there were a few big ones, and it has been a journey. It's been many years in the making, with intentional decisions that were made along the way. The first one was, you may remember, you know, at the time of open access and for the first year or two after that, the sum of the source code of the consensus node was what was known as, what did we call it? Is it open access?
Open, yeah, it was
Open review.
Open review. That's right.
Review.
Yes.
Yeah,
yes.
yeah.
No,
So you
patented.
could see the code, but it was, it was like a month delayed from what was actually being built and all that kind of stuff. So I think the first big momentous thing that Hedera did was to purchase that code from Swirlds and open source it all. That was a big deal. So once all that, because it used to be like if you unwound this thing all the way, at one point, Leemon invents the Hashgraph. He and Mance are like, we should build a business around this, and they had several different business ideas that they were pursuing, and Hedera was like one of them, but not the only one, right? They had other ones.
Right.
So the platform code, as we call it, was sort of owned by Swirlds, and then Hedera used it under license and built on top of it, is the way that it was. And so the decision by the governing council to actually purchase it from Swirlds and open source it was a really big deal, because now we had a complete source code was open source, and it was all under the Apache 2 license. They didn't do anything funny with some kind of tricky license.
Sure.
It was just straightforward Apache 2. That was a really big deal. Then there has been sort of like a continual journey to try to clean up the source code, if you will. I mean, one of the challenges you have is you have an open source code. How do you get people to contribute to that code base? Because if you just open source it, but you don't get any contribution, then, okay, people can see your source code, but you don't really have an ecosystem built around it. You know what I mean?
Yes.
So getting those contributions is an essential part of what you're trying to accomplish, but it's very difficult to get to. You need to have documentation. You need to have, development processes. Like in a normal development team, let's say a non-open source normal development team in the world, you've got Slack or email or whatever you're using for communication. You have a whole bunch of channels on there where all the developers are working on. A new person gets hired into the company. They immediately get rights onto the source code. They can create branches. They can merge. They can do code reviews, all that kind of stuff. If you have a problem, you call up 3 of your buddies and you work it out, or you go to a whiteboard and you sketch it out. None of that stuff works in an open source context.
Right.
If I'm an external developer and all the decisions are happening on a whiteboard somewhere that I don't have any access to, or in a Zoom call that I don't have access to, or to a Slack channel I don't have access to, how can I participate? And if I can't participate, I might spend time working on some code that then everybody else just dumps on or throws away or says it won't work, and I have no idea why, right? So part of this journey, which we haven't finished this journey, we're still on it, right? Mm-hmm. Getting the source code open source is part of it. Or not open source, but added as well. Getting it open source, yes. Getting it added to a foundation with governance, yes. But now there's another step that we're still working on, which is open development model. How do you do development in an open way? Right. And there's some tricky things there that we have to work through. Like, for example, what's the release process? How do we go through releases? How do we decide what goes into a release and what doesn't go into a release? All that stuff has to be opened up as well, in some way, shape, or form. There's got to be more visibility into what we're doing. We need to have better documentation so that people know what's going on and can actually learn it. Like, how do they learn the internals? As a I don't know what's the right way to say it. As a person who's always at the very deep end of all these technical details, I know how hard and what the delta is between somebody who's like casually interested and then wants to know the nitty-gritty details. There's a huge chasm there. Mm-hmm. And if we don't start supplying a path for that, getting contributors would be very difficult. The other thing is just like, as of now, if you were to join Hashgraph, you don't immediately become a committer on the project. Sorry, It doesn't happen anymore. You have to earn your place just like everybody else does.
Okay.
So yeah, you want to be a committer, that's awesome. Start contributing. Give us a whole bunch of contributions, and then the maintainers will vote as to whether you get to be a committer or not. And if you want to be a maintainer, guess what? That doesn't happen just because you got a promotion at Hashgraph. Sorry, it doesn't work that way anymore. You want to be a maintainer? A whole bunch of good contributions, and the maintainers have to vote you in as a maintainer. And if you left Hashgraph, if you earned your way up, let's say that you were at Hashgraph and you earned your way up to be a maintainer and then you leave, guess what? You don't lose your maintainership. You're still a maintainer. You earned it. It's part of who you are, right? So those sorts of organizational changes are, some of those things are immediate as of now, and some of those things we're still working on, like how do we do our communication? LFDT set up some Discord channels for us in the LFDT Discord space. I haven't even logged into it yet. I'm not sure how we're going to do that communication, right? Do we just use the discussion boards on GitHub? Do we use Discord? Do we create like a public Slack that people can join? Like, what do we do? I don't know. We're still trying to figure out some of those details. So it's a journey that we're still on. We're sort of like at the mountaintop and we can see the valley, but we're not there yet.
I think also too, kind of coming back to the beginning of our discussion, and I think that you know, these have really been some key criticisms of Hedera and developing in the space of, as you described, you know, the roles and capabilities of affecting the network are or have been tied to your organization, which is, I think, the source of a lot of these kind of symptoms of frustration we see in the community.
Absolutely.
And what you're really getting at is this actually is a process of decoupling control over how you can affect the network from where you work, essentially.
Absolutely. Yes. And that's one of the things that I'm very excited about is, you know, because we would feel it, right? There was, the frustration was very real on Discord. There were some very, you know, hurtful things said at times.
Yeah.
And we would just be like, the fundamental root cause of the problem here is that people don't feel like they have any other way to affect the outcome.
Right. Other than getting angry and expressing frustration through force. That's the only mechanism they've had, right?
All they have is totally understandable. 100%. I get it. Right. And if they didn't, they would never be heard. Right. It was like the only thing they could do.
Yeah.
So it was like the system was set up to produce that sort of discontent, which is not good.
Yes.
The nice thing about having proper governance is that anybody can earn a spot. And now, you know, anybody can earn a spot. And so do it. Go for it. And the consequence of that should be a much more together sort of approach.
Yeah. I like that. And one thing I want to touch on too, you mentioned you're still on this journey and the next challenge is, how do we stand up these pillars for communication, for collaboration? I mean, open source software development has changed so much over the past 10, 20 years. And a lot of people do view open software or open source development much like they see like content creators and stuff, where nowadays a lot of folks might not be familiar, but like some of the web applications you use or critical infrastructure, like are dependent on like 2-3 people, you know? There are these loud personalities. There are these big things. So when you have a product that, you know, has, you know, I imagine like dozens of repositories and you have this big Hiero ecosystem, right? You really start to think about all those different personalities attaching to different parts of it, leading different parts of it. Like, what are you interested in, diving in? And then the complexities of conversations. And what I would say, as maybe a piece of feedback for you guys on this next step of the journey is, I think when we look at how do we communicate and how do we build up those pillars, I think that the ecosystem already, and many of these folks in the ecosystem may already have those answers, or have maybe already developed some of those channels. There might already be some of these nooks and crannies in this ecosystem where these people are already kind of working on stuff. So I think that definitely it might be an opportunity for you guys to take a pit stop and kind of go, hey, is this kind of communication and collaboration potentially already happening? Can we step into that? Similar to what you guys have done at a broader scale at the Linux Foundation of going, well, there's this thing already here. Maybe instead of reinventing the wheel, we step into it, you know?
Yeah. And I think it's you know, on the day-to-day work that engineers have, one of the challenges that we'll be faced on this whole communication side is the effort that it takes to communicate broadly versus one-on-one. So in the, like, for example, before your call, this call, I was on another call and we were discussing the, you know, details around how we dynamically change the address book that's used by consensus nodes. If you were to look at community nodes and anonymous nodes, in order to get there, we need the way for somebody to be able to add a node to the network or remove a node from the network dynamically. Whereas today we can only do it at upgrade boundaries, you know, each month. It'd be nice if I had a new node and I showed up and I said, here's my new node, and look, people have stakes to it. Will you please, plug it in and it starts working? That'd be nice. For that, we need what we call a dynamic address book. So we're talking about the details of that. Now, I had written all this stuff down. We had this big document. It's actually on GitHub. You could go look at it. It has all the details on the architecture and design of the consensus system and how dynamic address books fit into it and all that kind of stuff. And with the other experts on the team, there was misunderstanding. We didn't understand each other. And so we got onto a call, after a couple of weeks of back and forth online. It's like, okay, let's just get a call and work this out. That'll be one of those things that we just have to figure out, how do we do this effectively in open source sense? Right. If we do everything through, typing, then it's going to take longer to get understanding and get things done. Because I'm sure that the people who are listening, they're not just like, yeah, that's great, you guys are building great software. What does it mean to me? Like, how do I get my HIP implemented? If I were to say, oh yeah, HIPs are going to take 10 times longer to get done, you'd be like, no, that's not acceptable. It shouldn't get worse. So I think part of the challenge that we have on the communication side is to figure out, how do we do it in such a way that we don't lose any of the effectiveness at actually getting things implemented.
Right.
Long term, it always works better for you, because those communications required you to write things down, to create diagrams, to publish documentation, and all those things are good for the next person who comes in to learn the system. But like in the moment, it can be really frustrating, because you're like, this should have been like a 3-hour thing, and now it's a 3-week thing. What's going on here? And so those are just the sort of challenges that we have to work out. But
I think the other thing that you hit on too that was very interesting is you're talking about this chasm between someone just piquing their interest into things and then diving in really hardcore into Hiero. And I think something that should be continued is, I do think that a lot of soon-to-be developers catch the bug on social media platforms, most prominently X. And I think that those forms of communication are so important, because everybody gets to be a fly on the wall. And seeing what you've been doing was like super refreshing, where I was like, not only are people getting the information they need, but I'm actually watching Richard kind of learn in real time, like, oh yeah, that's how to explain this, or okay, that's how this is kind of connected. And it's this really fast feedback loop. So there might also be something to be said about like working backwards a bit and going, sure, on this other side of the chasm, we're going to have to come up with all sorts of various robust, workflows and stuff. But on this side of the chasm, what if we just tweet more, and so I think that that's something cool, where in that particular situation you described, it might be so valuable in so many different ways for you to just maybe after the show or something, just post one of those tweets and be like, we're trying to work on this address book thing. And like, this is kind of what happened. This is what kind of we're thinking of. And as you see, all of a sudden people start piling in. And I feel like a lot of those people are soon to be developers, maintainers, board members of this thing. And if they don't get that chance on kind of that far side of the chasm, I think that's really where the magic's going to happen as well. So it's so funny in this industry, and I think in the open source development industry more broadly, it's like sometimes it just comes down to posting a tweet. It's so stupid, but it's so true.
Even with like out proper context, or sometimes I worry like, it's like, I could put this tweet out and nobody will understand anything that it means. And, I should do another thing. And then I should write some more context. And then I should, next thing you know, it's turned into this massive thing. And I'm like, I can't do that. And I think I just need to, I think you're right. Like building the bridge from both sides is what we need to do in order to make it work.
And the really cool part as well is it's not like the Hashgraph where you have to carry over the state with every message. Like I fall into that trap sometimes, right? I fall into that trap sometimes where it's like, I wanted to say like, oh, this thing's happening now. But I'm like, but are they going to know what I mean by that? And I got to do this thing. And what I've learned is that's kind of when you have these followers, that's kind of what it's all about, is when they read the next one, they're still holding the state of all the different things you've said previously, and they're adding it to their like little internal hash graph kind of thing. And so I think you could, like, I would definitely encourage, folks other folks in their bio where I'm not comfortable on social media, similar to yourself. That's really the beauty of it, is you can look at X as like just a big group conversation. And I think you can trust that most of the people that are following you and participating in those discussions are right along there with you. And I think it's totally fine to not worry so much about context, and just kind of send the next message, send the next thought. I think, you know, my best tweets are the ones that I put the least thought into, to be honest, the ones that resonate with people the most. So I definitely encourage that 100%. Everybody on the team, you know?
Yeah. No, I'm definitely not the only one who's uncomfortable with tweeting. But I think that it is important. I mean, I follow people too who I'm like actually really impressed with what they did. You know, in terms of how they tweet. I'm definitely not an engagement farmer, that's for sure.
Not a reply guy.
No, I'm just throwing out whatever whatever I've got. I think that's really good insight, and it is something that I need to do, and I've kind of felt that way actually for a few years.
Yeah.
I have to say though that the work, you know, one of the things that I love about working on Hedera's code is, as an engineer, it's like the trifecta of all the hardest things that you have to try to do. So your number one, all the code is open source. So, you know, as an engineer, you always want your code to be good.
Yeah.
You really want it to be good if everybody else can look at it. So, you know, there's some incentive there. Number two, it's got to be absolutely secure. Billions of dollars are riding on this thing.
Right. Yeah.
You cannot screw this up.
Yeah.
Number three, it's executing on the public internet in the most hostile environment possible. So you have to be very careful about what you build, because you know, it's not like if I was writing bank software has trillions of dollars running on it too. Yes, but I don't have to worry about internal, you know, the internal systems being, you know, attacking each other. Whereas on a public internet, you have to worry about these sorts of things. It has to be incredibly high performance. It has to, let's see, we got the performance, we got the security, we got the fact that it's open source. Oh yeah, and the other one, you have to deliver features quickly, because, you know, you don't want to miss the NFT thing. You don't want to miss whatever the next big thing is. You have to be able to do it quickly. Those are really hard things to do. It is very hard. In fact, in the software engineering industry, it's generally, you know, the three sides of the triangle. It's impossible. You pick two, you can't pick all three. You want security, you want fast development and performance. Like, you know, pick two, you don't get to pick three. Here we pick all three. So it's an incredibly difficult task. Now, if you look at Ethereum, they actually don't do the speed of change thing. They picked two, which was they wanted to have stability, and you know, well, they didn't even get performance out of it. They just picked one, like stability. Again, not saying anything bad about those guys. Super impressed with a lot of things that they do.
We love you, Ethereum. We love you.
Yeah, that's right. No, I'm like super impressed. A lot of things they do, I look at and say, yep, that's very good. We should do more like that. But in this case, at Hedera, it's like we've got all three of the hard problems, and we're doing them all simultaneously all the time, which is, you know, so for anybody who's thinking about, you know, what good open source project you want to contribute to, if you're looking for the most hardcore, it's right here. It doesn't get any more hardcore than this. So there's lots of really good problems to solve.
Yeah, 100%. And yeah, before I move on to my last couple questions here is, I think I see that as definitely one of the best first steps you guys can take in this on the other side of this is, now that the mechanism of resistance has been removed. It's like we've talked about the separation of these roles to where you work. I think that it's a much better opportunity for you guys to come out front on social media. And when you hit these walls where you're like, what do we kind of do? Like really lean on this community, and even the non-developers in this community that are users of the product that can provide that product feedback in a really direct way. I think that really the winning open source projects out there are the ones that have, you know, the engineers out front communicating with the users and in a public forum. Because at that point it's like you're killing three birds with one stone. It's like everyone can see what's going on. Not a lot of folks are in GitHub. And it's motivating, like probably getting those messages and having those conversations and stuff is like very motivating to kind of be like, wow, okay, the feedback loop is tight on this, you know?
And I think it's great for the community too. Like they need to know that there's a lot of engineering work that's going on. And you don't have that visibility. You go, where, what's going on? What's being developed? I didn't see a new feature. What's happening? There's a lot of work going on. And I know like community nodes is one of those things, right? It's like, oh, community nodes is removed from the roadmap. Everybody gets upset. Well, it was just in the next 3 months. It's not in the next 3 months. There's a lot of work that needs to be done in order to get there. Real technical work that has to be done in order to get there. And we're working on it heavily, but it's not like, so I think having more of that open communication helps solve those problems. It's kind of like with the other one, right? Why are people angry? Because they cannot participate. They have no way of being able to participate. Why are people, discouraged about the roadmap? Because they don't see everything that's going on into the roadmap. If they had more visibility into what was going on, like when Vitalik gets up and says, we got the merge and the splurge and the purge and the whatever urges, all of his urges. It's actually really helpful, right? Everybody can look at it and they can go, oh yeah, okay, I can see where we are on this journey. None of those things are telling me that it's going to be the next 3 months or 6 months or whatever, but all of those things are telling me where our journey is and what it is that we're trying to accomplish. I think that kind of communication is really important, and those are the sorts of things that Hiero will be publishing. Is here are all the projects that we're working on, and this is why we're working on them, and this is where community nodes is in that list, and why we have to do these other ones before we can get there.
Gotcha.
They have to be built on top of it.
I think that's a key thing you hit on. Is it's not just where is it in the roadmap and what is in the roadmap, but what's the thought process behind it? What's the reasoning for it? What's the context for it? I think that's been the missing piece for so many people of like, okay, we got the stuff in the roadmap, but why this and not that? Why this ahead of the other thing? And it's felt like if Hedera would just kind of provide that insight, it's like, I'm pretty sure most people would be like, oh, I get it. That makes sense. Or I don't understand this stuff, but it's great that, there's someone that does, so I think that is going to be hugely valuable for the whole ecosystem.
Yeah, absolutely. And Hiero will be the home for these things. Hiero's doing the roadmaps, the hips and all that kind of stuff will be coming out of the TSC.
I love that. I wanted to just kind of maybe now just drill down on a couple things, because this kind of touches on a few different questions that I've seen floating around in the ecosystem. And obviously folks, especially that maybe like aren't developers or are just kind of HBAR investors or whatever it is, they're kind of like, how does this trickle down to somebody who maybe isn't even talking about code and just like using the ecosystem and using the products in the ecosystem and maybe just holding HBAR or something. And just to kind of kick off on this, it's like, can we talk about what meaningful impacts will this have on like the Hedera ecosystem? Not just for developers, but kind of a little more broadly, like for like these investors and enthusiasts, like can we extrapolate on that a little bit and kind of talk about what kinds of impacts could this have for folks outside of that developer circle?
Yeah. So when I look at what leads to success, what are the essential success criteria that you need for broad adoption of your network, right? There's some basic table stakes, code has to be available, things like that, sure. But then there's kind of two big things. One of them in our case, in the sort of business that we're in, liquidity is a big part of it. Like there's got to be users, there's got to be money. That's important. Neither one of those. The user aspect is something I can have an impact on. The money part, that's somebody else's problem. I can't deal with that. But then there's another aspect of it, which is like the developers. Where are the developers who are building on this stuff? Like where does that all come from? You look at, I don't know, like a PayPal or Starbucks or whoever. A lot of these guys are deploying to some L2 that's over on Ethereum and whatnot, because it's sort of, it's sort of just where people are at. So you've got to be able to bring in all these sorts of people to your network in order to be really successful. And I think that having those public roadmaps, those things that we were just talking about, is actually an essential part of that too. If I'm an enterprise developer, I'm an enterprise architect, I'm sitting, behind over there at Oracle, how do I even know that there's such a thing as Hedera? And when I am evaluating technology, one of the things that I'm going to use to evaluate technology is how many other people are using this thing. There's a very strong herd mentality in engineering, and it's not for no reason. It's because you are about to commit, millions of dollars of R&D to build a solution on top of some library or service.
Mm-hmm.
You want to know that that thing's still going to be there 5 years from now. And one of the ways that you de-risk that is by doing the same thing everybody else is doing. Like,
yeah,
if
it's so
everybody
true.
else is
Yeah.
on this, then at least if I got it wrong, I'm just as wrong as all my competitors. So we're all good.
Right. Okay.
So I think that, being part of the Linux Foundation, having access to all of these enterprises and all of the developers that are part of that, individual developers, enterprise developers, everybody, being part of that ecosystem, getting more recognition and notice from them, being able to say, we are part of the Linux Foundation. You can trust that this project will be here 5 years from now because we're part of this larger system. In addition to all of the, I tell you, the Linux Foundation is very happy with all of our council members as well, because they could say, wow, that's a lot of companies that are supporting your open source project.
Right. Okay.
That's very true. So we're sort of like building that. So I think, the liquidity part aside, because I don't really have much control over that. But on the, LFDT won't have any impact on liquidity, right? That's something else. But as far as like engagement from, people who are looking to try some piece of software, we do have a real opportunity to make a difference there. And I think those are the two things that matter. Again, it's like Facebook is not successful because of Facebook's user interface, right? It was successful because it created a network effect. Yes. And in order to create that network effect for Hedera, we need to it's a network effect of developers, and it's a network effect of finance and users. Those are kind of the network effects that you're trying to look for. So I think for the normal investor, when they look at this, what should they think? They should judge us by how well we bring on more people to help build this thing and direct this thing. If they see that happening, then they would say, you'd be able to see tangible progress. If at the end of the day, we don't end up getting any more participation or collaboration, then, we haven't really achieved the goal.
Gotcha. Okay. So basically, to kind of just to tackle what you're saying is if you're an HBAR investor, obviously HBAR people are like, I want my HBAR to go up and this and that. It's like, we talk about enterprise use cases. We talk about the pipeline. We talk about these things that Hedera wants to help bring to market on this network to drive up TPS and usage and revenue and these different types of things. And what you're saying is this cuts down a little deeper on that and removes barriers for enterprise developers to start building on Hedera. And it starts to create that network effect flywheel of the reality is, guys, people are going to use what other people are using. And we can talk about the chicken and the egg and the cart and the horse all day, but at some point you just have to make a move and you just have to dive in. And kind of to what Leemon said in his presentation, Hedera is betting everything on this. This is their dive in moment. And this is kind of what you're speaking to is like, if we really want to do something that addresses the majority of the problems we see in this ecosystem, this multi-year initiative that's ongoing, this is really the one that's at the lowest level, the one that's at the deepest level.
Yeah, it's the one that at least I can affect. I can participate in.
Yeah, exactly.
I let the other guys have to deal with the other part of it because we can't do it all. Yeah,
we can't do it all. I was going to say too, I'm pretty sure I know the answer to this question, but just to kind of, because I know this is something that people keep bringing up, and maybe just to put it to bed, is like, does the utility of HBAR or its role in the ecosystem change in any way with this new initiative? Yeah. No. It's the same old HBAR we know and love. And we talked about the HIP process. The other thing too is, with this and with the developer angle and stuff, we've been talking a lot, almost exclusively about like enterprise. But when we look at now flipping to the Web3 native world, right? Like we look at the Uniswaps of the world, the Saucer swaps of the world, the HashPacks, and potentially other Web3 products on other networks wanting maybe to move to Hedera or integrate Hedera. Does this Hiero stuff affect that as well outside of the enterprise stuff?
So some of these projects that you mentioned, I would just say are enterprises in trajectory.
Right. Okay.
Like Uniswap is a pretty big deal.
Yeah. I'm talking more like projects or companies or whatever. Yeah, that don't touch the Web 2 world really.
Yeah. Like the native Web 3.
Yeah.
I mean, I would hope so. I would think that again, like as in Hiero, the priority, the technical steering committee is going to be reviewing all the HIPs, which gives what changes are going to be made on the network. Like let's say the metadata NFT HIP, right?
Right.
So metadata NFTs, that's great. We can, or there's that one we've already done and implemented, but there's a batch transaction HIP right now that I think we started that one like maybe 2 years ago. If you were a builder, like a Web3 builder, and this was important to you, then this is the place to come. Before it was a little bit tricky. It was like, well, who do I talk to? I could go, I don't have any way to get invited to the Hedera technical committee meetings. So I don't have any way to pitch myself to them directly. And I don't have, it wasn't so direct. Now it's direct. It's like we have a technical steering committees. Those meetings are all public. Everything's public. You're interested, then you can get on the agenda and you can come and you can say, this is important for my business and this is why. We could have that sort of thing very direct. So I think for builders in the Web3 space, having a direct way to impact and get involved in the HIT process is huge. And on the code side, as we were talking about before, right? If you have some HIP and it's super important to you, in the classic open source sense, you put your money where your mouth is. You say, this is important to me and I will contribute. Sometimes people will say things like, oh, you guys are just trying to get free work from other people. It's like, no, you could look at it that way, but that's not the right way to look at it. The right way to look at it is, in the open source, if you have something you want, you can get it, but you have to participate. There's no freeloaders, right? Everybody has to participate. If you just want to sit back and let us do the work, then it'll get done when it gets done. If it's important to you, you participate. So I think having that governance, having that HIT process, having the opportunity for anybody to become a committer means that you have control of your destiny. If you are a saucer swap and there's some particular feature that you need in the smart contract system, there's a path. There's a path to participation and to being able to affect that change and have that control or destiny over your own future.
I remember, and maybe it's still up there, but I remember on the Hedera.com website, there was that picture of Leemon with his arm out, and there was that quote, carve out your own piece of cyberspace. And I think what you're touching on here is like that being brought to life now, whereas before you'd see that quote and it was like, it doesn't quite feel that way, but I'm starting to feel that now. And like you said, these kind of things take time. But it feels like we're getting closer to that vision that Leemon kind of laid out of anybody being able to reach in and affect this to grab their piece of it. So I think that's amazing. And on that, I want to kind of start wrapping this up, but I wanted just to ask one or two more questions, then just look at some stuff that people have been asking in the chat. But this, I think, would be really helpful as an exercise to help people, both developers and non-developers, kind of understand what the goal of this initiative is. And I think that the exercise is, can we flip forward, a few years in the future and envision like what that Hedera and Hiero ecosystem looks like? Obviously, a few years in the future, Hedera is no longer on that the governing board. There's new members that have been flipped over. Both from like a technical standpoint, an ecosystem standpoint, is there a picture in your mind of what this looks like in the, if we flip forward 3, 4, 5 years?
Yeah, if we're successful, right? 3, 4, 5 years from now, I would hope that the number of, if you were to look at the committers and the maintainers on these projects, that it would be much more diverse than it is today. I don't know what the numbers would be, but if half of them were from third parties, that would be tremendous, right? It'd be tremendous.
Yeah.
If the velocity at which we are working is double or triple what it is today because we have 5-6 times as many people participating, that would be tremendous. If the community who is contributing feels like they are part of the core development team, we have succeeded. We have done what we set out to do. If the governing the technical steering committee, the TSC, well, by rule, it's going to be diverse anyway. So we're in pretty good shape here. In a few months, we should have it. But if people are engaged in the election process, so that the members of the technical steering committee actually represent the voters, and there's a diverse set of voters, then we will be successful. We should have it should be a feeling that it is widely participatory, that everybody has a voice. Doesn't mean things are going to go the way that you like. It doesn't mean that you're going to get what you want.
Right.
But it means that you can participate on equal footing with everybody else. And 3 to 5 years from now, there should be a lot of other, everybody else's. There should be a lot of projects. It should not be that all the projects are, Hashgraph people or anybody who's paid directly or indirectly from Hedera. It should be just a bunch of people. I would love to see, enterprises that are part of Linux Foundation, actually have, people with their email addresses actually submitting code to our projects.
Yeah.
That's the future I see.
I love that. That's great. I mean, what we've been talking about and kind of this thing that you illustrate is, in a weird way, I think when people really start to understand this, especially the non-developer crowd, kind of how my brain works as well, as I go, oh, this is what we've been talking about this whole time, but we haven't had the inside look. We haven't had that peek behind the curtain to see what was going on. And as it turns out, what's going on is a process of removing the curtain, right? What we're trying to hope to, what we've been hoping for. So that's really how I summarize it is it might not look like how I pictured, but we are on that journey, in a very powerful way to kind of, I think, where we've wanted to go since 2018, 2019, since this public network. So I think that's really the best way I can frame it is if people say like, what's the impact of this? What's the impact on HBAR? What does this mean? I think that really what this is what we've been hoping for in a lot of ways, from both a technical standpoint, an ecosystem standpoint, a business standpoint. That's kind of how I see it a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely.
Love it. So really quick, there was some questions some folks asked. Jim from Acor, he said, great talk. I think people have really been enjoying this conversation, but he says there are close to 100 repos for Hiero. Do you have any tips for new developers to get a better understanding of the code base or specific needs that the higher functional technical priorities for the team?
Yeah, it's a great question. There are a whole pile of repos, and each one of them is fairly deep. So one of the things that we're doing, actually, we had, there was a website that we set up on Hedera.com. I think it's under Hedera.com/developers, maybe.
I think I recall that. Yeah.
It started to break this down, but one of the things that we're doing is we're working on the Hiero pages to put some sort of a taxonomy of the different projects. Like which projects are kind of like the core ones, and then cool. Almost like rings of on the outer layers. And also each one of the projects is going through and creating a bunch of good first issues. So we're participating in the Hacktoberfest. GitHub has in October they do a Hacktoberfest.
Okay.
And so we're participating in that. We're producing a bunch of good first issues so that people could come and just pick something up easy to get started with.
Okay.
A lot of those will probably be things like, oh, your getting started documentation is junk. Here's a PR to improve it.
Great.
Like, fantastic. Let's do that. That's a great PR.
Yeah.
Don't come expecting everything to be all beautiful. But I guess that's part of it, right? You just,
yeah.
Do your work. So so we're participating in Hacktoberfest. We have good first issues. We're working on adding some pages to the Hiero website that sort of breaks down what these different projects are, how they're related to each other. One thing that I've wanted to do for a long time, and probably it's a really bad idea to say this publicly because then people are going to be asking me, when it's going to get finished. But we need to have a proper, video that we can post on YouTube or something that describes the architecture and how all the pieces fit together. Right. Because even things like what exactly is the relationship between a consensus node and the mirror node, or right. even questions like, what kind of queries can I do on a consensus node versus a mirror node? Why are we trying to deprecate some of the queries on consensus nodes and move them to mirror nodes? Why? Well, there's very good reasons for that. One of them is you should never ever query a single consensus node because it could lie to you. You should query at least a third. Well, why is it a third? Well, because consensus requires a little bit more than 2/3. So if you query a third, then anyway, there's like all these sorts of things, right? We need to have some videos like this that describe the overall architecture, and then you can map that onto the repos. You would know exactly which repo you were looking for. Otherwise, you just see a big wodge of repos, and you're like, "What are these things?"
Yeah.
And it's pretty intimidating.
That stuff's going to be so important. That kind of content. Another question. I think this is this was on my mind. Coinman the HBAR Barbarian asks, "Will Hiero have an X account?"
Good question. I never even thought about it. I don't know. I guess probably. I mean, I'm just thinking. We don't have any staff. Hiero doesn't have any staff. There's a technical steering committee, and that's it. So if we were going to have a Twitter account or X account for Hiero, who would run that account? Like, where is it a member of the TSC or? I don't know. That's a good question.
That'd be really interesting. Yeah, I think that like this is the other thing that's interesting about open source software development is we're learning more and more with open source software development is code and different things like that is a component of it. But as you're touching on, a huge part of open source software development has nothing to do with GitHub or code. It has everything to do with communications and messaging. And so I totally see the opportunity for a non-developer person that isn't involved in the code base, but is a part of those committees that is focused on communications, right? And like, we've got folks like Grelf's like, I'll run it.
Yeah, I know.
Imagine if we got Grelf. I can imagine. Yeah. So I think that's something to really think about is, these different roles that aren't necessarily related to the code base itself, but maybe could perform some of those functions and make those same contributions, but instead of those contributions being pushed into a repo, they're pushed out to social media. That's very interesting to think about.
We definitely need something because, it would be really handy if we were going to review HIP whatever, that we could put out some message that said, "Hey, we're reviewing HIP whatever. Here's the meeting if you would like to join in."
Yeah.
Like, well, yeah, I'll yes. You're right, Grelf. Never thought about it. Come on, sir. Yeah. I probably should have.
That's the beauty of this, though. I think that you talk about velocity. I think that's what we're feeling here is like when we really start to open this stuff out and pull back the curtain, it's like a lot of great ideas come to the surface and immediately it's like, oh, I didn't think of this. I didn't think of that. And let's make it happen, So I think that this energy is something that, I think is going to be great for this ecosystem. I love that.
Yeah.
So to wrap up on this has been, Richard, I really appreciate your time. We'll have been going for over an hour here. So I really, really appreciate it. I think this was something that so many people were curious about. And I think that this conversation we've had is really a great introduction or explainer to like what's going on with Hedera and Hiero right now. But just to wrap it up, let's just kind of zoom back in and look one step ahead. Right now, because as we know, a lot of what we've been talking about is kind of down the road or in motion, but who should be paying attention to Hiero right now and what is the call to action? Who should be getting involved and how should they do it?
So I think one of the very next thing that we're working on is a TSC. So there's a lot of, processes and procedures and things like that. But the most important thing is establishing the voting methodology so that we can fill out the rest of the TSC. And I am hoping that we get some of the prominent technical voices in our community to either be nominated or to nominate themselves where appropriate for those positions. I think that filling out the TSC is the #1 most critical thing that we need to work on in the next month. I'm hoping that anybody from like the wallets or the dexes or any of these other the Karate Combat or whoever, any of these people are eligible to sit on the TSC. So I'm trying to establish the voting procedures so that we can do that. Like, how do you do a nomination?
Right.
We have to define that, get those nominations, and then get people to participate in that voting and fill out that TSC. I think that's really critical. And it will also give the best, vision into what we're really trying to do. If we are able to get good people on that TSC, it'll really show that we're serious about having that sort of decentralization, getting other voices involved. The other thing I would say is that if you have an open source project or you have any open source project that is in the Hedera space, we should talk about you joining this thing. This is not a Hashgraph organization. This is a Linux Foundation organization. So if you've got some open source component to your thing, in fact, right in the charter for this thing, we talk about wallets and exchanges and bridges and dexes and so forth. If you have any open source components of those things and it would make sense for it to be part of the Linux Foundation, then we should talk about bringing that stuff over.
Love it. That's awesome. That makes me really excited. Right away, some people come to mind, and even at Hgraph, I work at Hgraph with Tyler McDonald. We're a mirror node provider, and right away I kind of go, oh my, and I'm seeing folks in the comments like May from HashPack and Grelf and like some of these other people. Like I look just through the chat of this stream and I go, man, they're like, everybody's kind of right here and waiting. And so it's so exciting to hear this. So yeah, I definitely echo what you're saying is like, if there was ever a time to really take the deep dive on this ecosystem, now's the time. And we kind of know where that deep dive needs to happen. So that's awesome. Well, again, Richard, I really appreciate it. Was there anything else that you wanted that we didn't get a chance to touch on, or any other messages you wanted to give to the ecosystem?
Well, I just hope I didn't bore anybody today. I know.
Not at all. Not at all.
I think that, I don't know do I have a closing statement? My closing statement would be, okay, well, I hadn't thought about it. It's not polished, so you guys are just going to get like my honest take on it, right?
Yeah.
We're not always going to agree with each other. That's just normal, and that's okay. And but we all have the same goal in mind. A lot of us are very much, invested in the success of Hedera. We want this to be successful. A lot of us came from good, stable places, and we're in this project because we love working with the people that we're working with, and we love the technology, and we want it to be successful. This is a big opportunity for a lot of us. I think generally this is true for everybody who's in the ecosystem. We all want to be successful. We're only going to be successful if we can do this together. And but we're not always going to agree on what the best way forward is. We're not always going to agree on the details, and that's why we have organizations like Hiero, where it can be open discussion and democratic, and we can have those discussions. And I think that yes, there's been a lot of I may not tweet very often, but I'm on Twitter a lot. I see what's going on. I understand, same on Discord.
Yeah,
I get it, and I think that we're all on the same team. We're all same team, and we're going to try to make this thing as successful as we possibly can. So, call to action, the more participation that we can actually get at the code level, the better. We're not perfect. We're learning as we go. We're fixing things as we go. But definitely, we are completely aligned with the mission. The mission is to have an open, decentralized network, public, open, decentralized network. And we are going to make sure, to the best of our ability, that we're successful at that. And it takes a whole bunch of people to come together to make that happen. It's nothing that I can do. It's nothing you can do. It's only things that we can do. And so that's important.
I love that. That's a great message. No, that's a great message. What you're saying is kind of something I talk about on the show a lot, is whatever disagreements projects might have, or disagreements that, I'll share on the show that I have with, Hashgraph or whoever it is. It's at the end of the day, we've got more in common than not. We all want to see the success of this network. And so I think that, again, by creating this new foundation for conversation, I think it's just going to move things through a lot easier. And as well, like, just, for folks that don't know how the show works, like, this is just a conversation. There was no kind of like questions provided to Richard ahead of time.
Yeah.
Like, he's just showing up. He's probably like, I don't know what's going to happen. So this guy yells about stuff a lot, but that's how the show is. And so big kudos to you, Richard, as a vice president of software engineering at this organization, to just come on this community show, just have an open conversation. No heads up on anything. It really speaks to kind of this new direction, this new energy from the top down. At Hashgraph and Swirls and Hedera and all that kind of stuff. So really greatly appreciate you making the time and coming by, and hoping for more of this from you. I think that there's a little bit of a marketer in you. You speak very well about this stuff. Really, you do. Yeah.
Well, I think the whole secret is just to tell the truth. That's what I'm trying, but I don't know.
Love it. No, I love it. That is very true. Well, Richard, really appreciate it. Thank you so much.
All right. I appreciate it. Thanks for letting me on, Bryn.
Absolutely. Anytime. Good stuff. Well, that always gets me bullish, is when we've got these leaders at the very top of this network that are making time to come by. A show like this, like I got my dog here. It's like, this isn't some kind of crazy production. So I think that's what really excites me the most about what's happening with this ecosystem. And like Richard said, I've shared my criticisms about stuff in the ecosystem, but when you really break down those barriers and have these conversations, you really learn how much you have in common and how aligned things are. And it's good to see that these problems are seen, these problems are being addressed, both in a business way, but also kind of the world that Richard's come from, which is engineering, software, those different types of things. So I think that was a really, really great conversation, and I think encapsulates what the Hiero stuff is all about. Quick mention too, for everyone watching, a great way to support the show is sending HBAR to the show's wallet, 0.0.1725506. This is how I get tokens from the community and sell them to pay for subscriptions for the show and the equipment and all these different types of things. I'm very blessed to not really have spent a ton of my own money to do the show. The show doesn't make a lot of money, but it doesn't need to. And I haven't really been asking for contributions for a little while. But now I'm opening it back up because I've got some exciting ideas for the show. The demand for the show is growing. So I need the resources to make it happen. So wallet 0.0.1725506. And also too, even if you don't have any HBAR, subscribe on follow me on X, YouTube. It's on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. All that kind of stuff is greatly, greatly, greatly appreciated for the show. So really appreciate it. Now, before we talk about the Asset Tokenization Studio, a quick apology that this is going to be a long show. I wasn't expecting so many crazy announcements on Monday. I was hoping to have, I'm hoping to have Greg stop by. Greg Scullard from Hashgraph to stop by on an episode maybe next week or something to talk about the Asset Tokenization Studio, because it's some big news. But that conversation with Richard was great, and I think that my key takeaway with all the Hiero Linux stuff is I do think that the ecosystem could be underestimating the significance of this announcement and this development. Long term, short term, like Richard said, there's still stuff to do. We got to figure some stuff out. But long term, I think that we're definitely underestimating this. So I'm going to continue diving into the Project Hiero stuff. But yeah, I think the number one question for people was, how does this impact HBAR? HBAR doesn't change. It's the token for the Hedera network. Does this threaten Hedera's existence and competition, forking the network, blah, blah, blah? It's like, as we talked about with Richard, no, it's not about, do you have access to the code and can you copy Hedera? It's can you copy the almost decade of work done standing up an ecosystem? So that's not really a concern, I don't think. What does this do for the ecosystem? I think that a big, again, complaint and criticism that the ecosystem has had is, we hear about the pipeline and enterprise is coming and it's taking forever. We got to be patient, this and that. And what we learned was this in particular, and because it's part of the Linux Foundation, now all the idea people and innovators at these massive corporations, they don't have as much resistance to using Hedera for their projects. So I think that overall, it's hard right now to see any kind of real negative or have any kind of really substantial concerns about this announcement. I think that really it's hard to see that kind of stuff. I think that I'm seeing a lot of positive coming from this. And like Richard said, it's a journey, that the ecosystem is still on. So to be continued. Let's talk about the Asset Tokenization Studio before we wrap up the show. Massive shout out to anybody still watching. So Hedera announced the Asset Tokenization Studio. And this is again, something pretty big. Like we talked about at the top of the show, we did have the Hedera Stablecoin Studio, right? Which was announced last year. We talked about it extensively on the show, and we didn't quite know whether it was being used. Now we saw the news about the Australian digital dollar as one of the first products leveraging the Stablecoin Studio. And now what we've got the Asset Tokenization Studio. So another, we'll call it studio class product or tool set from Hedera for bonds and equities, right? And securities, different stuff like that. So this is a new tool set. This is in partnership with the HBAR Foundation, Hashgraph, Red Swan, and IO Builders. Red Swan, as we know, is doing real estate tokenization on Hedera. I think they're going to be having a portfolio of like billions of dollars, $5-10 billion or something like that, which is really, really great. But why did Hedera develop and launch and announce the Asset Tokenization Studio? So in a recent EY Parthenon survey, it indicates a transformative trend in asset management. 50% of institutional investors are interested in tokenized assets, and 44% of asset managers plan to tokenize their own assets soon. We already saw this again with RCAX tokenizing BlackRock money market funds and Aberdeen tokenizing their money market funds on Hedera through RCAX. And this includes high net worth individuals. 77% have invested in, plan to invest in, or want to learn about tokenized assets, attracted by benefits like lower transaction costs, enhanced liquidity, improved performance, and increased transparency through blockchain and distributed ledger technologies. And just to touch on that, what we're talking about is a money market fund being utilized as some kind of like yield earning stable coin that you can swap and saucer swap. Like we're talking about some pretty far out stuff that's pretty exciting. Now, that's one thing. There's a quote here as well that I wanted to just highlight from the CEO and founder of Red Swan. Again, when we talk about projects that are tokenizing real world assets on Hedera, this is something focused on real estate. So CEO Ed Red Swan says, the Asset Tokenization Studio is the result of months of development, fine-tuning, and critical examination of existing hindrances to commercial tokenized real-world asset adoption, such as the limitations with ERC 1400. Each aspect of this toolkit has been built with the modern user in mind, providing a seamless point of entry into the tokenized market with forward compliance at its core. And that's a really key aspect of this too. I think that one of the members of the initiative, IO Builders, I think they, from what I can recall, they were part of that initial ERC 1400 standard. So that's very interesting. Another part to this too that's very important when we talk about bonds and equities is the Hedera Asset Tokenization Studio leverages the network's features to address compliance, security, and regulatory requirements needed by users, and users, of course, being issuers of these bonds and equities. So with native KYC and AML account flags, high customability, and the key thing here is built-in support for the US SEC regulations D and S, the studio provides the programmability that's needed for stuff like this. And again, similar to the Stablecoin Studio, this is something that is designed to be kind of like the Mac in the PC world, right? It's the plug and play thing. It's an offering from Hedera to the traditional finance world to provide a platform where they can easily get this stuff on chain, on graph, which I think is really important. And just to check this out really quick, when we look at the actual page for the Asset Tokenization Studio, pretty cool product page. They got a video there, but it highlights some of the different things, right? We were talking about simplifying the tokenization process, how it handles regulations with the different ones specified here, some of the benefits of it, the folks involved, of course, and some of the folks, some of the organizations that are issuing securities on real world tokenized assets on Hedera. Going down here, a bunch of different features, right? This one here is the most important, the life cycle of the asset. So when we talk about, yeah, for sure, we create the bond or equity on a network like Hedera, but then we talk about how does it move through markets? How does it change custody? How is it bought and sold? How is it modified? All these different types of things. All of that stuff happening on chain is really going to be critical. And the other aspect to this that's touched on a little bit is just accepting that the regulations, the rules are constantly changing. So this isn't like a product that is complete out of the box yet, because Hedera knows that a lot of these different regulations, rules, parameters are going to continue to evolve and change. So I think this is also a product designed to evolve and change. And it, of course, it also like features the production grade SDK, audited smart contracts. It's open source. It's built on the ERC 1400 standard. So pretty robust. And there is in the documentation, I can't really zoom in on this. God, GitHub book or whatever this is like when I zoom. Oh, there we go. There we go. So look at this. This is what it actually looks like. So you go in, you connect your wallet. Maybe it's MetaMask or HashPack or whatever it is. Then you have this hosted dashboard where you can create new digital securities, new bonds, new equities. And you can go through these different processes, fill out all this information, right? This is a user-friendly platform, right? Even though this is some real deep developer stuff, similar to the Stablecoin Studio, this is a product, an application that's meant to be used by finance people, right? You don't necessarily need to be a developer to issue these types of assets on the network. And I'm just scrolling through this documentation just because seeing these screens, it kind of starts to connect those dots in your brain, especially for the non-developer crowd out there. This is something that's really, really interesting. So this is a great resource. The documentation, even though it might be a little focused on developers, if you're curious about how this works, this is a really great, again, peek behind the curtain of how this actually works, what it looks like to use it. And if you're even more curious, on the actual page, on the Hedera page, the Asset Tokenization Studio page, there is an interactive sandbox. You click that, and you're brought into like the test area for this. So you can actually go in and start going through a demo of what it is actually like issuing bonds and equities on the Hedera network. So very, very, very cool stuff. And like I said, I'm looking forward to having some folks on, maybe Patches too, to talk about this product and kind of what it can mean for the ecosystem and for real world assets as we kind of see that continue to evolve. So we're going to definitely talk about that more on the show, but I just wanted to highlight it today just because, again, Monday was a huge news day. Also, I forgot to add this to my notes that just jogged my memory. God, I really mean this. I really hope Grelf doesn't call in. I love Grelf, but I can't afford to have this show go any longer. To be honest, I swear if he calls in. Let me see here. Hedera. I got to search this up. So there was also the DLT Science Foundation that joined this new MiCA Crypto Alliance. So this was very interesting. So this new alliance aims to simplify the European Union crypto regulations, compliance, and boost blockchain adoption. So folks that are familiar with this, MiCA is the kind of boilerplate regulatory label in the European Union, and similar to the SEC and some of the organizations in the US, this is the regulatory body that is going, I feel, to regulate crypto essentially. And because of that, you really want to have people involved that get blockchain, that get crypto. And what's really cool is that Ripple, Hedera, and Aptos have joined together with the DLT Science Foundation to launch this MiCA, crypto alliance, essentially formulated to strategize on this stuff and get everyone on the same page. And it's exciting to see this because we also saw Ripple and Cardano and Algorand and all these other networks joining alongside Hedera on the DREC Alliance. So this is painting another picture of kind of what we were talking about with Richard earlier, which is decentralization, coming together, forming these networks, all these different types of things. So that was an announcement. That was one of the announcements on Monday, right? Alongside Hiero and the Asset Tokenization Studio. And we've got Karate Combat today, and Hedera isn't screwing up the marketing on it, and the sun's out. And I'm not going to check the price of HBAR. I don't want to ruin the vibe, but you get what I'm saying. Things aren't going bad. I think that we are seeing some positive signs. Last week's episode was called The Winds of Change, or no, it wasn't called The Winds of Change. That was I can't even keep up with it. I had the HBAR Bull on one of the episodes called The Winds of Change, which was a reference to a tweet from Pluto from HashPack. And I feel it, I think that, to be honest, there's still a long way to go. There's still a lot of problems to solve when we look at funding for the ecosystem and resourcing and some of these other organizations. There are still a lot of problems and a lot of pains and frustrations to get over. But this week, clearly on Monday, a lot of these things were addressed. And we're seeing some results of those, like I'm saying, with Karate Combat and the Hedera account being alive. It's alive. It's sharing. It's Oliver, the social media guys, like Karate Combat, and things kind of feel switched on. So I really like that. And so today, I feel more positive on this show. I don't think that I've really griped and complained on this show, this episode, which is probably the first time it feels like in a year. So take that as you will. But it definitely does feel like things are improving. And I know that when I had HBAR Bull on the show, I asked him the question, what would you say to somebody that wants to leave this ecosystem because they're really burnt out and frustrated? And he said, give it another 3 months. So I think that we're starting to see some beginning signs of this stuff. It'll be very interesting to see what the new governing council meeting minutes look like. It'll be really great to see Charles, the president of Hedera, start those community engagements more. It's just that we got to keep the foot down on the gas for sure. But we also have to take a minute here and, smell the flowers. It wasn't a bad week so far, and that's to be celebrated. And I think that it's largely due to this community. I've got my retail pays the bills hat on today, and I think it's just about that. So the right things are happening, right? So I really, really appreciate everyone tuning in. This was a longer episode, but I think a really great episode that people have been excited about. And another thank you to Richard Bair from Hashgraph, aka Swirls Labs, for joining the show, making the time to talk about this stuff, especially making some of these concepts easier to understand for non-developers, the HBAR investors, the HBARbarians, right? HBARbarians, we like to think we're super smart, but sometimes we just like the token. We just like the token. We just like HBAR. We just want to figure out what's going on. So it's really helpful on that front as well. But with that, I'm trying to think if there's anything I forgot. I think we got it all, guys. If there's anything I forgot, shoot me a message on X, and we'll keep this going. Like I said, the Hashgraph Enthusiast Show is live every Wednesday at 12 p.m. Eastern, 9 a.m. Pacific. I'm focusing more on interviews. I'm going to be having more guests. I think people really like that. Like I said, there's more developments coming to the show. It's now broadcast live on LinkedIn, but there we go. And stuff's popping. So expect more good guests, more top news, and really appreciate you guys, and especially the supporters of the show. It means a lot. So hello, future. Goodbye, past.
Thanks for listening to the Hashgraph Enthusiast Show, hosted by Brandon Davenport.
Listen to past episodes and support the show at itsbrandond.com/HBAR.